Nonchalant dreadhead?
Mama, girl behind you.
Dreadhead?
Red.
Who you digging me?
Dig my boy.
Hey.
Huh? Dig my boy.
Redhead.
What is the nonchalant dreadhead?
Everyone's very favorite internet source, Wikipedia, defines slang as a vocabulary of an informal register, common in everyday conversation, and also often refers to the language used exclusively by particular in-groups in order to establish group identity. But what happens when people outside of those groups start using their slang? Let's talk about intent, appropriation, and slang maxing. Slang, as a form of communication, is an incredibly important cultural tool. It lets people within a community know that you're also part of that community by displaying your knowledge of the group's inner workings. But with the rise of the web, people are more interconnected than ever. Minority groups that were previously suppressed and could only share language within their community now have access to the entirety of the internet, and the internet is seeing their posts. Suddenly, the slang used to identify with a community is now being overused by people outside of it.
If we know anything about how language spreads in social media, it's that straight white girls adopt what gay and black people are saying, and then everyone else adopts what straight white girls are saying.
That was Adam Alexic, also known as the etymology nerd. He's an internet linguist and academic social media influencer that I personally follow, and the author of the book that inspired this video. This is Aglospeak, a book published by Alexic in 2025 that approaches quote-unquote Gen Z and Gen Alpha slang from a linguistic standpoint. And other than probably being the only book that will ever put the Rizzler song lyrics to publication, it's an incredibly great read about how the internet changes language and how it spreads. Chapter 7, aptly titled It's Giving Appropriation, looks at the rising trend of popular media adopting the slang of Black and/or queer communities. So, let's discuss AAE. African American English is the dialect or manner of speaking used by Black communities. Since the days of Vine, popular slang has often been lifted directly from AAE, from bay to fam, and now ka or gyat. To gain more insight on this topic, I highly recommend a very informative video by Tanaisa Beer, who goes by Tinita D, here on YouTube.
Social media can simultaneously oppress and empower the marginalized, and in this case, it's propagated Black speech without the Black body, and because it's cast out the Black body, you get non-Black folks fumbling through established syntax and speaking in a way they don't fully understand.
White people borrow AAE to seem cooler, as Dee and Alexic put it, but in doing so often misinterpret the true meaning of a word or dilute the word so it no longer holds the same meaning. But does a white person saying twin really matter all that much?
The line between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation is very thin, and in this case, it will always have sinister undertones because the people the language is being pulled from are still being marginalized and maligned for speaking in a way they invented.
White people don't experience the same discrimination that Black people do when using the same language. Tanita D's video, which you've been seeing, was sparked by an ABC News article that featured interviews with white parents about the slang that their kids were using. After immediate and widespread backlash, ABC News updated the article to feature a section about the AAE origins of said slang, which included knowledge from an African American associate professor of linguistics.
I understand that historical and cultural context isn't something most people think about whenever they use AAE, and it would be unfair to ask that everybody do, but when you've got a multitude of articles, posts, and whatnot painting it as Gen Z slang, it effectively contributes to the erasure of its Black beginnings.
There is a real argument that the general population borrowing AAE slang can be hurtful to the Black community. So, what about queer slang? Well, a lot of the slang picked up by my generation comes from the ballroom scene. Ballroom, or ball culture, is an LGBTQ+ subculture that historically refers to the underground drag bars that can be found across the United States as far back as the mid-19th century. However, when speaking about language in particular, a lot of modern Gen Z vernacular comes from the predominantly Black and Latino house ballroom scene of New York City in the 1980s to 1990s. Like any marginalized in-group, ball culture formed a unique vocabulary to signal a sense of belonging and to build identity, explains Alexich. He gives the rise in popularity of RuPaul's Drag Race as an inciting incident to the white straight takeover of queer slang, such as slay, serving, or mother. This is further explained by Rachel E. Lang in her 2021 Communications Master's thesis for Illinois State. RuPaul's Drag Race switched from a smaller TV channel that specifically focused on queer content to VH1, which more than doubled its viewership in 2017 and brought it to a more general audience. This change correlates with the rise of heterosexual presence in LGBTQ+ spaces and the appropriation of queer culture and vocabulary. Bachelorette parties start coming to gay bars, Jimmy Fallon starts doing lip sync battles, a prominent drag ball event, on The Tonight Show, and SNL starts mentioning RuPaul's Drag Race in their skits. Straight people, often white girls as Alex Sitches previously mentioned, adopt queer slang and begin to use it in their day-to-day, either correctly or incorrectly. Suddenly, slay and yas aren't positive affirmations from drag queens, they're cringy words that white girls used to say. They've been tired out, not by those who invented them, but by those who borrowed. Lang explains this concept as commodification. I'll end with a quote from her dissertation that helpfully summarizes what I've been saying. When aspects of a culture are removed from their appropriate context, they become watered down and ultimately disrespected by the mainstream culture. In general, the dominant culture is white, cisgendered, and heterosexual, and freely takes from the non-dominant cultures, including queer and African American communities. So, borrowing slang from marginalized communities can be considered a form of cultural appropriation and may contribute to the erasure of said minorities. But what happens if you're borrowing slang from a community that's meant to be made fun of? An incel is an involuntary celibate. The term signifies that that person is part of the associated online subculture, often found coagulating on the anonymous forum 4chan. Incels engage in hostile sexism, anti-feminism, the dehumanization of women, the endorsement of violence against women, rape culture, and much more. They are either considered a hate group in and of themselves or have significant overlap with other pre-existing hate groups. Incels have also been linked to multiple acts of terrorism. Chapter 6 of Aglo Speak, titled Word-Pelled Slang Maxing, might be just a little bit hard to say with a straight face, but it addresses the recent trend of incel terminology being used by the general internet.
It's commonly said that all internet culture is downstream of 4chan. The website's anonymous, so users have to demonstrate their in-group proficiency by coming up with new slang words, which spread in the form of memes to other websites like Reddit, eventually filtering out into the mainstream through even bigger social media platforms like TikTok.
Now that incel terms, notably Chad, Alpha, Beta, Mog, Mewing, and the suffixes pilled and maxing have entered the vernacular of the average Gen Zer, the idea of incel ideology becoming even more widespread can be nerve-wracking. Breaking the immersion here a little bit, researching incel terminology was unbelievably uncomfortable. The slang that manages to slip out into TikTok and Instagram Reels is the very, very tip of the iceberg. I thought it prudent to mention that along with being wildly misogynistic, incels are also incredibly racist. To get a better understanding of incel communication, I read a 2022 research paper by Ksenia Bogatic, a doctor of English linguistics at the University of Belgrade, Serbia. She begins by saying that incels are equating ideal masculinity to whiteness and framing it as being threatened by immigration, cultural dilution, and left-wing activism. Then, Bogatic goes on to list the 20 most used terms on incel forums that she found, 6 of which equate to race. Number 1 should be immediately recognizable. Within the context of the incel community, a Chad refers to a white alpha male, whereas the general internet drops the white part and considers any superior male a Chad. It might seem like I'm spiraling, or to use another term coined by incels, acting like it's so over. But this adaptation of incel language can actually be a good thing. Adopting incel terms is taking them out of the incels' hands and robbing them of their original power as they simply become brain rot words, explains Alexich. When the greater internet picks up incel slang, it's being used ironically to poke fun at the actual community. The internet doesn't like incels. No better can that be seen than on the Reddit page r/inceltears. Marta Dynał, a professor and linguist at the University of Łódź, Poland, did an analysis of the subreddit, specifically to look at how Reddit users use humor to make fun of incels. Here's a passage from her conclusion. Importantly, the disparagement of incels at r/inceltears is anchored in the Reddit community's genuine negative disposition towards, and hence disaffiliation from, the target. This disaffiliative disparagement humor must not be mistaken for other forms of humor, also online, based on playfully pretended aggression and jocular abuse. Negatively disposed towards incels, community members voice their serious criticism of harmful incel ideology while posting messages oriented towards amusement. Hence, the humorous items on the subreddit offer further evidence that humor tends to be the bearer of serious meaning, notably critique. Dynał touches a bit on the internet's biggest communication problem: intent. Over text posts and edited videos, it's hard to tell if people are being serious or not. Something said ironically can be spun as genuine, or vice versa. Memes from the incel community leak out into the general web. Then, as Alexic so eloquently puts it in Aglo speak, to most of us, these memes were just funny. The internet likes edgy humor, and if we can poke fun at a hate group while we're at it, that's just an added bonus. To summarize, a large proportion of Gen Z slang is borrowed from other communities. Words like bro, cuh, and gyat are derived from African American English, and when white people use them to sound cool, it can seem ill-intended due to the fact that black people are discriminated against when using the same language. Words like ate, mother, and serve come from LGBTQ+ subcultures, specifically drag balls and ballroom culture. Due to the popularity of queer media, like RuPaul's Drag Race, gay culture is being adopted and commodified by the heterosexual majority. This makes it hard for LGBTQ+ people to identify other members of their community and to retain their safe spaces. However, sometimes taking power away from a subculture by adopting their slang can be a good thing, notably when it comes to the misogynistic online community known as incels. Words like Chad, mogging, or maxing are derived from incel terminology. While originally used in serious and discriminatory contexts, the words are now used ironically by the general internet, which robs them of their power. What I want to leave you all, dear viewers, with is this: the language we use matters. Now, I'm by no means trying to police the words you're using. Hell, any one of my friends could tell you I use a healthy amount of AAE in my day-to-day speech. Slang is not exactly something you can cold turkey, but I am telling you to be aware of the context in which you're using the words and the intent you're putting behind them. Be aware that all our generation's slang comes from somewhere, and it's up to us to make our own decisions about how to use it ethically. And that brings us to the end of this video. Please leave comments about what you thought or any questions you might have. I'm very excited to answer them and to talk with you all about this. If you want to read or watch the sources that I used for this video, they are all linked in the description in a Google Doc. Yeah.